There's been an explosive eruption at that volcano we've been watching in Hawaii. We have a new image to show you. This photo is from the U.S. Geological Survey. It shows smoke and some debris falling on the Big Island. Natasha Fata joins me with the details. So, Natasha, what more do we know about this?
Andrew, just a few moments ago, we received an official update from some of the authorities in Hawaii who are monitoring what's going on with the Kilauea volcano. We heard from Michelle Coombs from the USGS, the Geological Survey, and she said that the volcanic eruptions and activity around Kilauea began last night. But the big explosion took place at around 4:17 local time this morning. And those are some of the images we have of that explosion being described as incredibly powerful. Now, what we understand is that plume of ash, the gray smoke that you see going up in the air, went up 30,000 feet. So that's roughly 9,100 meters into the air. It certainly, she says, got people's attention. But now that several hours have passed, they say the impact of that particular explosion, while impressive and certainly very energetic, has not been widespread. They say it's consistent with what they had thought they would receive from the volcano, because they have been anticipating these eruptions over the course of several days. She was asked, is this the big one? She says, well, I don't use that language, but it is certainly the biggest one we've seen from Kilauea since all this volcanic activity started a couple of weeks ago. She says, but we are anticipating more eruptions, more explosions, more energy, but this is certainly the most powerful one. And she says it does relieve some pressure from the volcano, but as I say, they are anticipating more explosions. Let's have a listen to Michelle Coombs.
This explosive event is consistent with what we were thinking might happen. And so right now up at Halemaumau, we're still getting ash emissions at a lower level, kind of 12,000 feet above sea level, so a few thousand feet above the crater floor. So we're still watching things real closely. We may have additional larger events, more powerful events, kind of like what we saw earlier this morning.
So, Andrew, one small piece of good news is that while it was incredibly powerful in terms of intensity, in terms of energy, it was short-lived, the explosion. So as a result, they didn't have a high volume of material, as we've been discussing for the past couple of weeks, that there was this concern of these huge boulders shooting up into the air and then coming down to the ground. They say so far it doesn't seem to appear that this particular explosion led to that kind of eruption taking place.
And there was also a health update. What did we learn?
That's right. So that came from the Civil Defense County, and they say that they are monitoring the quality of air. And of course, that's very important. We've been reporting on that as well, because all that chemical that's being released as a result of the explosion goes into people's lungs, and it is posing a health concern. They say there is an increased level of sulfur dioxide in the air, which is why they're paying close attention to the schools in and around Kilauea. Many schools have been shut down. They say people need to monitor the alert system, and if they're indoors, stay indoors. If you're around the area, try to get out of being outside, and they say continue to watch, they say, for the alerts. Blue is good. Red, the doctor said, is get out of Dodge. So those are literally the words she used. She said they're monitoring this, and yesterday it certainly was a red alert.
All right, Natasha, thank you.
You're welcome.
For more, we've reached Mike Poland. He is a geophysicist with the U.S. Geological Survey. He spent 10 years at the Hawaii Volcano Observatory, and today he is with the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory in Vancouver, Washington. And so, Mike, it's been 2 weeks since the Kilauea volcano rumbled to life. How bad is this latest eruption today?
Well, this is sort of what was expected based on the kind of activity we'd observed previously in 1924. The Hawaiian Volcano Observatory has been around since 1912, so there are pretty good records of what happened in 1924, and thus far what we're seeing now is kind of following that script.
Is this as bad as it could get? Is this the volcano basically blowing its top?
Well, there actually have been periods of greater explosive activity at Kilauea. We tend to think of it as this volcano that's very gentle, it puts out lava, and occasional explosions like this one. There have been time periods in the past where it has been more explosive, but the conditions for that kind of activity are not there. They're not in place right now. So what we're seeing now is sort of what we would expect from this sort of activity.
And so are you concerned about it? Is it concerning?
Only in that it's really a big change in the way the volcano had behaved. But the national park is closed. The greatest danger to people in terms of these explosive events would be in the immediate vicinity, within a few hundred meters of the vent area. But the national park is closed, the caldera is off limits, and that's where the greatest danger to people is. Unfortunately, no one's allowed there right now.
But just, I mean, some of the figures, we've seen 9,100 meters of smoke and ash into the air. I mean, that just seems unbelievable.
It is. It's a stunning turn for people that think of Kilauea as this very gentle volcano that just puts out lava flows. But these explosions, fortunately, are just being driven by the interaction between water and hot rock rather than magma that is explosively putting gas out into the atmosphere. That's a much different kind of explosion and would be much more powerful. Think Mount St. Helens, 1980. So what we're seeing now is fortunately relatively small. And even though they're likely to continue, we're not going to see a lot of interaction with magma because that's drained away as a result of the eruption further down the East Rift Zone.
So are the recent shallow quakes likely behind this?
Well, I think the shallow quakes will probably continue. Those are occurring as the faults that bound this caldera begin to rupture because the whole volcano is sort of deflating. It's sort of deflating as if air is being let out of a balloon beneath the ground. And that's causing these faults that are on the sides to rupture. And that's likely to continue as long as the deflation continues.
And are you concerned about that?
No, not especially. It's got to be very unnerving to be there right now because the earthquake activity is nearly constant. There may be some rock falls. There may even be some small collapses around the former site of the lava lake. This is sort of what happened in 1924. Smaller events like this happened in 1960. So what we're seeing right now is not unprecedented for Kilauea. But certainly it's new over the last few decades. We haven't seen this kind of activity in really about 100 years.
So it has been raining. Does this help or does this cause more damage with the plume of ash in the air?
It doesn't really make that much of a difference. It really just turns what could be a light dusting of ash into a bit of mud falling from the sky. The ash itself is like pulverized rock dust. It's a bit like being on a construction site. So right now, whenever there's a bit of ash that's being generated, mixing with the rain, it's falling as like little bits of mud particles.
Do you see any sort of timeline that could suggest when this volcano is going to calm down?
That's an excellent question. And really what we have here is the analogy with 1924. Back then, the explosive eruptions continued for about 2.5 weeks. Not on a regular basis, but every day or a couple times a day, there would be an explosion, sort of like the one that we saw this morning of varying intensities. So based on the analogy with 1924 and what Michelle pointed out, certainly this isn't likely to be the last one, and it may last for days to weeks.
Now, the Kilauea volcano is one of 5 volcanoes on the Big Island. It's the only one currently erupting. How likely is it that another could begin to erupt? Is there a domino effect that could come into play?
Not necessarily for this particular case, but that's actually an open question in many ways. There's long been a speculation that there might be some sort of interaction between Kilauea and the neighboring volcano Mauna Loa. Mauna Loa hasn't erupted since 1984. Mauna Loa has inflated in the past many years, and it has experienced earthquake activity. It's very heavily monitored. So we'll certainly be keeping an eye on Mauna Loa. But whether or not something happening at Kilauea now could trigger something at Mauna Loa, that's not particularly well known at this point, but it doesn't seem very likely.
And so just finally, so you think that this could be over in the next few days, given your example from a century ago?
Well, it's probably going to continue at least a few days. It will largely depend on how the summit behaves over the next few days. If this deflation of the summit that we can see with our deformation equipment, this sort of balloon that's losing air underneath the ground, if that continues, then we're likely to see continued activity in terms of these small explosions from the summit, probably at least for days.
All right, Mike, thank you. That was research geophysicist Mike Poland in Vancouver, Washington.